Well, it's already become obvious that Europe is preparing for a major war, and the troops of France and Poland are practicing a nuclear strike on Russia in case of war. Today, the President of France, Emmanuel Macron, stated that Europe is under unprecedented pressure. Since the United States of America, China, and Russia are simultaneously acting against European interests. Therefore, Europe needs to be ready to defend itself from attacks coming from all three sides at once. I should point out that these are no longer just words. Well, first of all, the leaders of the European Union discussed at a closed meeting in Cyprus the day before how Europe would wage war without the participation of the United States. And what's important is that the European Union has already openly stated that they are preparing a plan for the practical implementation of collective defense, not within NATO, but within the EU. And this came as a big surprise to many. It turns out that the European Union Treaty has its own version of Article 5 on collective defense, and it's even stricter than the one outlined in NATO. Well, secondly, France and Poland are moving from theory to practice. And now both countries are planning to conduct nuclear exercises over the Baltic, and they will jointly practice strikes on targets in the Russian Federation, particularly in the area of St. Petersburg. My name is Alexei Pichi. Let's discuss this topic together, but before we start, please subscribe to the channel, like this episode, leave any comment under this video, and subscribe to my Telegram channel, Pichi News. The link to it is in the description of this video. So, today the President of France shocked many with his statement. In particular, Macron suddenly declared that Europe is under unprecedented pressure since the US, China, and Russia are all acting simultaneously against its interests. That's why he called on European countries to be more independent and united. Next, I will quote Macron. "We should not underestimate that this is a unique moment when the presidents of the US, Russia, and China are categorically against Europeans. So this is exactly the moment when we should wake up. We need to be a bit more confident and implement our own agenda." Now, many colleagues have a more sober view because after so many years we're saying, okay, we have to respond. We need to act as Europeans, be more united, defend ourselves and our interests, and for me, this is the right direction. And it's important to note here that Europeans are no longer just talking, but are actually looking for ways to defend themselves in practice. In Poland, it was openly stated that France and Poland are planning to conduct a nuclear exercise over the Baltic. And both sides will jointly practice strikes against targets in the Russian Federation. As noted, during the exercises, they will practice target detection and strikes with conventional weapons, primarily American-made JSSM-ER cruise missiles, against what they call important targets in the area of St. Petersburg. The maneuvers are expected to take place soon over the Baltic Sea and in northern Poland. These exercises are part of extending the French nuclear umbrella to those countries that are under threat from the Kremlin's aggressive policies. Plus, these are the consequences of the decision announced by French President Emmanuel Macron in Brest on March 2, 2026. In other words, Trump's ideas that French nuclear weapons could also protect neighboring countries are finally being put into practice. After the visit of the French president to Poland and his meeting with Prime Minister Donald Tusk on April 20, military cooperation is reaching that very practical level. And as reported, French warheads, of course, will not be permanently stored in Poland. However, they will be periodically mounted under Rafale aircraft, which will conduct joint exercises like this with the Polish Air Force. So in fact, yes, nuclear weapons will continue to be based in France. But if necessary, they can take off and be quickly transferred to Poland to launch strikes against Russia from there. But what's important is that the French will be simulating the use of nuclear warheads in these exercises. It is noted that the French fourth-generation multi-role fighters Rafale are capable of flying from France to the so-called Budapest-Krovets line and rehearsing attacks from there on targets in Russia and Belarus. The key point of these plans is that the Polish-French weapons will be taken outside of NATO bureaucracy. If you didn't understand, it means that this is essentially a new military alliance that can operate completely independently of what Mark Rutte, Donald Trump, or anyone else from the North Atlantic Alliance says. Developing common procedures will allow decisions about defense to be made much faster. The scenarios of the Polish-French exercises will also serve as additional plans for a possible attack from the Russian side and how to respond. So, if NATO is asleep and doesn't respond, France and Poland have agreed between themselves on how they will respond separately. In addition, the leaders of the European Union have already instructed officials to prepare a plan for the practical implementation of the collective defense provision. Cyprus, which currently holds the EU presidency, reported this on Friday. As the president of Cyprus, Nikos Christodoulidis, stated, the leaders of the European Union have agreed that it is time to specify the provisions of Article 42, Section 7 of the Treaty on European Union. And here it is important that, unlike the collective defense treaty provided for by Article 5 of the NATO Charter, this Article 42.7 provision of the European Union on mutual assistance is still not supported by any detailed operational plans or military structures. And here is what the Prime Minister of Poland, Donald Tusk, said the day before, quote, "Decidi." To create not just a formal but a real alliance, real tools are needed, real power in terms of defense resources, ensuring the movement of troops between countries and so on. This is a very relevant issue today. And here I should note that Article 42.7 of the European Union Treaty has been invoked only once. France did this after the Islamist terrorist attacks in 2015, and at that time the countries of the European Union partially replaced French troops in European and international military missions so that they could be redeployed to France. The article itself states, quote, "If a member state of the European Union is subjected to armed aggression on its territory, other countries are obliged to provide it with aid and assistance by all means at their disposal." As you can see, this is very different from NATO's Article 5. So for Europe, NATO of course remains the foundation of collective defense, but the European Union has additional instruments that complement it, as provided for by that same Article 42.7. But here's the question, what is all this for? And now the President of the European Council, Antonio Costa, has called on EU leaders not to leave key decisions about Europe up to Donald Trump. We can't avoid acknowledging the fact that the interests of the US no longer align with those of the European Union. And finally, as examples of the divergence between the US and the EU, Antonio Costa cited the American operation to capture the Venezuelan dictator Nicolas Maduro, the war in Iran, and Donald Trump's stance on Russia's war against Ukraine. And he says that the European Union needs to organize itself and develop an independent approach to defending its own interests. So, as they say, Europe has finally woken up. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. If you want to support the work of this YouTube channel, you can do so with any donation or a paid channel membership using the links and details provided. In the description of this video it says, "Support Alexei Pichi's channel. Choose any support option that's convenient for you." I will be grateful for any support you give. That's all. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.